Welcome back to Season 2 of our Summer Break Series. I'm Schuyler Lehman, the founder of Mission Advancement. And joining me today are Sandy Gallagher and Erin Sampson from our client service team. If you joined us last week, maybe you caught our first episode of this season. It was about telling the story and how organizations kind of craft the story that they ultimately tell. We're doing this series in 4 parts. The first being the story, what the story is. A second part being today, which we're going to talk about, is who the storytellers actually are in most nonprofit organizations and the roles that storytellers can play. Next week, we will dive into the audience or the prospects to whom we tell the story. And then the fourth and final week of this year's series, we'll delve into the plan that sort of sticks all that stuff together. So again, today we're going to talk about the leaders who actually tell the story in an organization. And so, and we're just going to kind of do this informally and have some fun. All right, ladies? So thanks for joining us today. Let me just kind of throw it out. Love to just brainstorm together with you. But when you think about who tells the story in most nonprofit organizations, what leaders are kind of the no-brainers? Who are the first ones that come to mind?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. First ones come to mind are the development directors. That's kind of who we think about, are the ones that you tell the story on a regular basis. And then maybe the executive director would be the next one that is part of the storytelling. That's what we see most often.
Yeah, agreed. Certainly, development directors tell that funding story, and I feel like if you walk into most organizations, they would. The receptionist would probably direct you to the development office if they told you who was trying to tell that funding story, right? But who else should be on that team?
Really, everybody should be on that team. The receptionist should have a view and a story to tell, because that organization and the mission affects and impacts everybody's lives, the lives of the people that it serves, but the lives of the staff too. And it's on everybody's part to be able to tell the story of how they're connected and what the organization does.
Yeah, really well said. I think too often the people who tell that funding story are relegated to a very small group of people in most organizations. And so when benefactors and key stakeholders show up, oftentimes the rest of the organization doesn't, number one, know who they are, but number two, even know what to say to them. They're kind of like hands off. Well, let me go get the right people to talk to you. Whereas everybody should be that ambassador, right, of the organization.
Yeah. Particularly those that are closest to the actual frontline work, right? They're the ones with the really tangible stories of impact.
Right.
That hear it first and see it first and witness it.
Yeah.
Erin, when you think of the kind of the characteristics of effective storytellers, what are the gifts that we're sort of looking for?
Right. Well, what Sandy said, it's the frontline people that are the ones that are doing the work day to day. So your teachers, if it's a private school, or your program directors, if it's a human service organization, they're the ones that see the impact of the mission and can be the ones to tell the story the most and do the best storytelling. And so that's who you want to get more involved in this process.
Have you ever, Sandy, I'll throw this one to you, but have you ever run into somebody, run across people that probably should be storytellers, but in practice they're just a terrible storyteller?
Yes, monotone, like no kind of engagement, don't really paint the picture. But oftentimes I find when you really get somebody talking, especially about a mission that they're passionate about and that they dedicate their time to, then if you really engage them, then the story can come to life.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some people that just sort of have God's gifts for being in a back office somewhere, and not really being out in front of an organization. And that's true in every organization, I'm sure, that exists. Any nightmarish stories that you've run across of people that probably haven't done such a good job in telling a story?
Yeah, I can think of a few times, and it might have been, from my shoes where we could have trained them a little better. And so I think to Sandy's point of there are people that within your organization that have a story to tell, and they might be nervous to tell that story. But if you give them some coaching and some talking points to that, I can think of some instances where I maybe could have avoided that if I had given them some talking points ahead of time.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about last week in the story, in the actual story that we tell, is the importance of kind of having the structure of, having some conflict in the story that makes it interesting, and making sure that everybody understands the story. When they're telling it for funding, that's a different story than they tell for why they exist. So, lots of times organizations will go through that training of elevator speech training where somebody will teach them to answer the question, why do we exist? But that's a different question than we typically are answering, which is, why should we fund? Why should people fund this particular mission?
Right.
So, so we've talked about kind of the obvious staff leaders. What about volunteer leaders? And really, when we talk, we're going to talk about a different kind of story in a few moments, but we're really talking about annual funding story right now. So when it comes to volunteer leaders, who else can be involved in that? And Sandy, I'll throw it to you.
Your board. Your board has to be involved in telling the story.
And how often do you think boards understand really how to tell that story in a consistent way? I mean, is that, in your experience, is that something that boards are trained in?
No. I think we hear a lot of boards say, we're not a fundraising board. But in reality, all boards are fundraising and should be fundraising. And if they're fundraising, then they're telling stories.
Yeah.
They're drawing people in.
To take that one step further, I mean, within the board is a development committee, and that's what are really great storytellers. Those are the individuals that have said, I enjoy this work and I want to be part of it, I want to help you. They are not the boss of the development director. They come alongside the development director and the development team to really be part of that in that solicitation or that cultivation of the donor as that impassioned volunteer. They believe in the mission, they love this organization, and they're doing this because they want to invite other people to come alongside them. So there's another key people within the board having a smaller subset.
So I'm going to ask you to say that again in just a moment, but I'm going to first make the general observation that so many nonprofit organizations that have development committees have no idea what the development committee should be doing. Right. Sometimes they migrate into that, de facto boss of development, which creates all kinds of kind of power struggles within the organization. They shouldn't be that. So what role should development committees take on? If you were going to kind of put that into a couple of sentences.
Yeah, so like I said, impassioned volunteer, but they are also helping open doors within their networks of who they know within the community, and they are also coming alongside and going on solicitations with the development committee and being a part of that. Not necessarily making the ask unless they're comfortable with that, but being that partner alongside the development director.
Do you want to add anything to that, Sandy?
It's the alongside, I think, is the key word. That they come alongside the work of the development team and the executive team to share the story. Perhaps they lead by example, but it's really coming alongside to help flesh out and develop the strategy for cultivating and growing a donor.
Good. Yeah, they represent a different perspective than paid staff do, right? I mean, a development director technically is paid to raise money, whereas they're sort of that hired gun, whereas the impassioned volunteer who comes in the form of a development director, is operating from a different premise. I support this organization. Let me tell you why I give my personal resources and why I give my time. And that changes the whole look and feel of a visit, right, for requesting support. So obviously, we agree board members could be really effective storytellers, especially if they understand the role that they're supposed to play. But I know, we've all had this experience where you had board members, sometimes even an executive, a head of school or a CEO, say, I'm not comfortable. I'm not a fundraiser. I don't want to do this. Okay, so how do we help an organization understand the importance of that can't stand?
Yeah. That's a critical role, especially in a head of school. That person is, has to be the external face of the organization. Executive director and head of school are the face of the organization, and it's critical for them to be part of that storytelling process. And we would like to believe that they wouldn't be in that role if they loved the mission and believed in the mission. So why not tell the story? And if they're not comfortable making the ask, that's where your development director can come alongside of them and be the one to actually make the ask. So there are ways around it. We'd like to get them comfortable with making the ask because they are the top of the organization, and that's a lot of times who donors want to hear from.
And sometimes it can be helpful to reframe over time what fundraising and the work of development is and what it's about. Because again, if they are the head of school or running an organization, by default you would hope that there is a connection to the mission and a desire to want to share it.
Right.
And so if you can kind of reframe what development work is to sharing something that you're passionate about, then that can kind of maybe shift an executive or a board.
If you think about how executives, the CEO effectively of any nonprofit organization sort of rises through the ranks to get to that position, they almost never come from the development office. I mean, they're always coming from the program side, or in the case of a school, the academic side. They were probably a creative writing teacher, and then an assistant principal and a principal, and then they rise to become the head of a school. And so it's not a wonder that they don't get to that position with a pre-existing set of skills that would apply to asking for $1 million or something like that. And it's interesting. I'm sure you guys have stories like this as well, but you wish you could turn around everyone. I have in my mind several examples where somebody around the board table would say, I'm not a fundraiser. Don't try to turn me into one. And taking them on as a pet project, and by the end of our arrangement, having them become a champion fundraiser that they had no idea that they could become. And it's not as awful as they thought, right? It's not as awful as saying, "Could I please have your money?" Because that's what everyone kind of fears.
Right. When you build that relationship with the donor, it becomes less scary to actually ask them to come alongside you and support this mission that you're passionate about. And we're not asking people to put money into our pocket. You're asking them to support an organization that does great work. And so if you can turn that board member around, because we all want to see people get comfortable with asking for money, you can really have a lot of benefits from it and see success.
Yep.
Yeah, I think of the examples where somebody agreed to go along on one and took more of a passive route. And maybe they might say, maybe as a board member they might say, well, let me tell you why this organization is important to me, but left all the kind of heavy lifting to the development staff member. And after watching it a couple of times, then watching them sort of draw out and take more and more of the role, and finally they're saying, like, I think I got this next one. It was pretty cool to see, for sure.
Yeah.
So we talked about leadership in the context of telling the development story, the ongoing sort of annual funding story. The other, obviously, storytelling example that we deal with all the time is how we tell the story of a capital campaign. So how is that different in terms of leadership and storytellers?
So with capital campaigns, it's really critical that we have a leader to lead the campaign. And so whoever that, it could be a board member, it could be somebody within the community of the nonprofit that is well known and well loved, that it's they're very well respected as well. And so for a successful campaign, we believe you have to have strong leadership from the start, and that's usually what we want to do, is enlist our leaders pretty quickly after we start a campaign, because we know strong leadership leads to a successful campaign.
Yeah, when you think about a chairperson, for instance, of a capital campaign, obviously we hope that they can be involved in some key solicitations along the way, but what other role might we ask a leader like that to play in the organization?
I think that the biggest role they can play is to lead by example, to come forward with time and with a gift. It doesn't have to be the lead gift, but they have to be behind the campaign. They have to support the campaign and really lead the charge. They have to be able to go to that solicitation and to cultivate those donors by saying, we've just given. We are 100% behind this campaign, and we would like for you to join us.
Oh, that's so important, is that leadership by example. Hey, one other role that I want to talk about for just a moment, and I'll kind of offer it here because this is sort of a dirty little secret, okay, and it may get edited from this this presentation. But the dirty little secret is one of the big reasons why we always want a chairperson, an effective chairperson, is that sometimes we have trouble getting the executive or the CEO to do what we want them to do, and having a chair gives us some leverage to do that. I apologize to all of my clients for exposing that little dirty little secret to you, but that is one of the reasons why we do put leadership in place. It's a different kind of storytelling, I suppose, but it is that leverage.
It's the accountability factor.
Let me shift to the way that we find leaders and the way we enlist them. So we'll kind of take this one piece at a time, but what are the qualifications? What's the criteria that we're looking for in volunteer leaders, either for campaign or maybe for a development committee chair, for instance?
Somebody well respected within the community. They're well known, and they are givers to the organization. That's a critical one. So it's that person that people admire and respect, and it would be difficult to say no to. So we're looking for those people kind of right out of the gate that would be hard to say no to, and that are going to help hold people accountable, hold everyone in the room accountable to the work that's being happened and accomplished.
Sandy, you alluded to this a minute ago, but what's another critical piece for a leader to do, obviously, before they engage others?
Engage themselves and make a commitment.
Especially in the context of a campaign. If we don't expect the chair necessarily to be the top gift in a campaign, but we do expect them to be able to make a gift in the top 10. And that doesn't mean, only wealthy people can be chairs. I know it may sound that way, but we recognize the importance of that person being able to speak peer-to-peer to others and challenging them to come on board in a campaign like that. Sure. So let's talk about the enlistment strategy. And one of my favorite things to deal with, and you guys can, I'll let you guys have at this, is when the executive of a client of ours might say, like, I know Bill. Bill owes me a favor. I'll get him on the phone tonight, and I can get him. So how do we really want to enlist leaders, and why?
We think you should approach enlistment just like you approach kind of donor planning. You want to really give the prospect chairs an experience, put in the time to plan something meaningful for them. So they know how important this is, how important the campaign is, how important the role is. And they get a preview into what they are going to be a part of, developing the experiences of prospects kind of behind them.
Yes, you really nailed it when you said it's the importance of it. And so we don't want it to say so-and-so owes us a favor, he'll do it for me, because then he won't approach it in the seriousness that it is. And so we want to put a job description in front of them, let them know what the timeline of the campaign is, and truly let them know what they're getting themselves into. Not in a bad way, but just in this is a big responsibility and it's going to make a huge difference for this organization. So we are encouraging you and want you to help us lead it and move it forward.
Yep. So for our campaign to have integrity from the beginning to the end, we need to set that precedent early on, right, as importance, so that we have a chair who will set meetings and keep meetings and not be the one who's canceling and moving things around because of little things that come along.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
And then I guess the final stage is, we go to great lengths to identify the right leaders, to enlist them in the right way, and lastly is to orient them. And what sort of expectations, should chairs have to be oriented to, whether it's a development committee or a campaign?
Yeah. So we want to make sure that they know what the timeline is, what's happening, either an annual fund, what the 12-month calendar looks like, or the campaign and what the timing of the campaign what the commitment around that is going to be. So making sure they know what the expectation is from the get-go, and then any sort of trainings that we can do alongside of them to make sure that they are confident and comfortable walking into solicitations. So setting them up for as much success as we can in the beginning is a key piece of leadership for these people.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've kind of covered the big topics, and so I'll give you just a second to just kind of sum things up of the things that we talked about today. What would be the big takeaway that you'd like to leave folks that might watch this series?
That leadership matters. Leadership matters.
And that everybody can be a leader within the organization. It's not just the development director or the CEO or head of school. Everyone within the organization can truly make a difference and tell the story, and everybody can be a leader.
So true. So I think what I would add to what both Sandy and Erin shared with us is simply that having the right storytellers, giving them the right tools, the right training, and being very selective in who we actually pick to kind of carry the most weight in a campaign is so critical and has so much to do with the outcome of a campaign as well as the outcome of an annual funding operation. Leadership, storytellers make a huge difference, just like the way that you tell the story makes a huge difference. Thanks again for joining us to this episode. Next week, the episode will focus on the audience, right? The prospective donors, and the way that we sort of sort through that piece of it. That's going to be led by Sarah, Josh, and Kade, all part of our Houston team. So thanks again for joining us. So long till next time.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of our summer break series, Summer School Edition. We are excited to hear from you and hope that you will submit questions about anything you heard today that you may want to know more about. We've set up a special place for you to do that at missionadvancement.com/summer break. So go to our website, missionadvancement.com/summer break. Submit your questions, and a member of the Mission Advancement team will answer them via video on social media over the summer. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.